This is a great crowd. Thank you all for coming. Congratulations, Anne.
Thank you.
So the first question I have, which is kind of a double question, you mentioned that you never intended to write a book. What led you to the place where you decided that, yes, I need to write this book? And what was the trigger that made you start writing in the first place?
First of all, it's wonderful to see everyone here. Thank you for coming. I've kept a journal since I was probably a sophomore in high school. So writing is a way that I have processed my thinking, and especially when I've had difficult times, I write. So when my daughter was going through her teenage years and dealing with depression and having some trouble, I was writing a lot. And about 10 years ago, that my writing started getting a little more descriptive. And I decided to start taking some writing classes at Great Smokies and some other places. And it really wasn't until the pandemic that I decided to get serious about trying to write a book. And the reason I wanted to write a book was mainly for myself. I wanted to try to unravel what my response was to what my family had gone through, and try to understand where some of my assumptions and attitudes had developed from my own upbringing as well as our society. And so putting that together was really helpful and healing to me. And then I realized that, and plus I finished it, and then I realized that a lot of young girls in our country are suffering from overwhelming, maybe 60% of reports said overwhelming sadness and hopelessness. And the Surgeon General had said that the #1 killer in the United States right now is stigma. And I realized that it was important for me to go ahead and share what I was writing about. So that was really the inspiration for me.
Can you read an excerpt from it?
I can. See if I can do this with a microphone. When I was young, Mom and I made up a game called Name That Tune. She'd play melodies on the piano from her college years in the 1930s, like Moon Indigo or Stardust or Moonlight Serenade. These songs, written to be wispy and romantic, my mother played with gusto. I didn't care. Our game was one of the few activities we shared. I loved watching her sturdy hands tap dance up and down the keyboard. She'd throw in a minor 7th chord, then experiment with other black keys, coaxing the notes to live close together and still be harmonic. If it didn't sound right, she'd try hammering the chords into submission, as if playing the piano harder could fix things. I patiently sat beside her on the polished, slippery piano bench, eager for her praise, proudly guessing each song as she pounded away. Being able to fix things was the goal of just about everything my mother did. She repaired a leaky faucet with the same zeal she applied to managing her unhappy marriage. Problems like dirty laundry were not to be aired. And for a mother to be successful, she told me, it was up to the woman of the house to stay in control of her children. Otherwise, quote, it will be a sorry situation. I made a mental note to follow her lead when I became a mother. For generations, women in my family lived by a strict rule predicated on a 16th century Protestant idea. Mothers were responsible for controlling their children's successes and failures. If all went as planned, the children would be happy. Then, and only then, the mother would be congratulated on a job well done, and she could relax.
Well, obviously, this book is about mothers and daughters and perfect mothers and imperfect mothers. I'm wondering, what were some of the challenges you had in telling this story?
Well, writing a memoir about yourself is challenging enough, but writing a memoir about a relationship you have with someone you love is really difficult. So the first thing I did was write my book, and then I asked my daughter if she would read it and if she wanted to anything to be eliminated, I would do that. Or if she didn't want me to publish it, I wouldn't publish it. But she was very supportive about it. And the other challenge was that a lot of books about addiction are just stories, the horror stories of all the things that can go wrong. And I wanted to write something that was a little more uplifting about recovery. I wanted to talk about what I had to do, what I had to change, what I had to learn in that process of being the mother of someone who was going through depression. So the other thing was that I almost didn't publish it because, you know, there's so many people who are suffering from depression and addiction who don't have the privileges that our family does, or who don't have a happy ending. And I felt like, who am I to write this and publish this kind of book? But at the same time, I realized how much memoirs had helped me when I was going through a terrible time. And so I decided to go ahead with it.
And as far as writing, do you feel like, I know that as a writing teacher, sometimes it's necessary to write through a painful experience, to make sense of it, to understand it better. While you were writing, the writing process itself, did you encounter surprising connections, insights?
Yeah, I found that writing this book was an incredible process of self-discovery. So as I was writing, I was beginning making these connections about my past, my family, about the influences of my conditioning from society, those types of things. So one of the things I realized was that during that time, I was in a constant state of post-traumatic stress. I was always worried about the next horrible thing that was going to happen. I was always anxious. And I also realized that I was doing a lot of self-blame. And I think part of that was because if I could blame myself for my daughter's problems, I could also be powerful enough to solve them. So there was an issue of control there. So these were all things that came to light as I was writing. Also, the writing helped me have more compassion for myself and other mothers.
I'm wondering if you could read another excerpt.
Certainly. Thank you for asking. I was making spaghetti dinner in our family home and waiting for my daughter to come home, my husband to come home, Henry. And so this was the scene. The back door slammed shut. Then there was silence. No hello, no teenager clomping into the room, slinging her purse on the kitchen counter as usual. Nothing. It was as if she had vaporized. I peered around the corner in time to see her slim body slowly slide down the doorframe and collapse, exhausted, onto the floor. I bent over and was about to make a joke when I saw her face had seized into a painful grimace. She was a crumpled tangle of long hair, hoop earrings, blue jean shorts, halter top, and tears. Dropping to the floor, I gently gripped her thin shoulders and peered into her face. What's wrong? What's happening? Choking for air, she tried to speak but couldn't. I wrapped her in my arms for what seemed to be a long time. I instinctively knew to wait. Olivia was a sensitive kid and comfortable expressing a wide range of emotions, but this was different. Staring up at me with swollen eyes, she tried to speak, but then her body gave way again to anguished sobs. She's frightened, not sad, I thought. The muscles in my back tightened against what terrible news she needed to tell me. Had one of her friends died in a car accident? All I knew was that she was safe with me now. I waited and gently rocked her, whispering into her ear as one would to a small child or a wounded animal, asking for her to take a breath, telling her she was okay. Then she spoke. The last 2 days, I've thought about driving my car into a tree, and I almost did it today. I came home as fast as I could. I was so scared, Mom. My heart seemed to stop. Olivia was crying, and I kept rocking us both like I hadn't heard what she said. None of it made sense.
It's a pretty dramatic moment. I'm sure, as a mother, trying to make sense of her daughter. A while back, I had a therapist who asked me to imagine what my life would be like if I had the perfect mother. And she kind of asked me like all the time, and it really pissed me off. And this is a question I explore in my own memoir. Like, what does it mean to be the perfect parent? What does it mean to be the perfect mother? And who decides what's perfect? In your book, you attempt to enact your idea of the perfect mother. And I'm wondering how this idea changed because of the experience you had with your daughter, and also about your experience with your own mother.
When my kids were young, I tried to be a good mom by doing all the things I thought I was supposed to do. I did help them with their homework. I drove them to other activities. I made 5 nights a week. I did home cooked meals that we could all sit around the table together, encourage them to go out for sports, that type of thing. But when I was confronted with my daughter's depression and addiction, everything changed. All of a sudden, the things that I thought were important, like what kind of grade she was getting or where she might go to college, those weren't important anymore. What I was facing with a life and death situation. So I realized that trying to be a good mother, there was a flip side to that, was that I would end up being either good or bad. It was a black and white thing. So instead, I tried to, realizing I wasn't going to be a perfect mother, I tried instead to focus on the skills I needed to be a more mindful mother, a more present mother in that situation. So her depression and her difficulty in school helped me learn how to clarify my intentions in our relationship. And I think that made a huge difference.
So speaking of the mother-daughter, in the book, you learned about the story of Demeter and Persephone, which gives you, in a way, a hook to hang your story on. Can you speak about why you related so deeply to this story?
When Olivia was in, I guess, high school, I decided to go to therapy. And after going several sessions and having the therapist listen to me be so upset and concerned about my daughter, she finally sat back and said, "You know, you're just like Demeter." And I said, "Who?" And she said, "You know, the story of Demeter and Persephone, it's a Greek myth." And I went, "Well, I kind of remember. Why don't you tell me about it?" Well, she said, basically, Demeter is the mother, the goddess of harvest, and she has a beautiful young daughter who goes out to pick flowers and one day gets captured by Hades and taken to the underworld. And Demeter goes crazy. She goes all over the place trying to find her daughter. She can't find her anywhere. She's beside herself, and she stops doing all of her duties, and the people start starving because the crops aren't growing, and she doesn't care. All she cares about getting her daughter back. And I said, "I can relate. I get it." And I said, "What else happens?" And she said, as any good therapist would, "You'll have to read the myth yourself." But I didn't, because I felt really vindicated. Here was this ancient goddess who was acting she was just as much of a mess as I was, and nobody was calling her a helicopter mom. I was totally vindicated in doing everything I thought I needed to do to help my daughter. So that, later I finally did read the myth, and I realized that, in fact, Demeter developed and grew and had to learn things, and she had to learn how to compromise and how to let go, and finally how to return to herself. But it was a beautiful story to me. It kind of provided a blueprint for me, but it also is a beautiful story for any woman about mother-daughter relationships and returning to yourself. So it's really important to me.
Yeah, and it really goes through the whole book, which is really beautiful. Let's hear another passage.
Okay. So in the book, I've peppered the book with several different chapters that explain the story of Demeter and Persephone, because I realized that most people don't really know the story very well. And I wanted to tell it from my perspective. So this is This is called Demeter. This chapter is short. It's called Demeter Reimagined, Persephone's Choice. At the insistence of Zeus, Hades reluctantly agreed to relinquish his bride, providing Persephone did not eat anything in the underworld. If she did, she would have to stay with Hades forever. Persephone understood this ancient law, but just before she returned to Earth, Hades said he would honor her as his queen if she remained. Then he gave her 3 pomegranate seeds, and she ate them. Did Hades trick her? Did Persephone have a lapse in judgment, or did she choose to stay? Homer's recounting of the myth is unclear, yet with that act, Persephone became ruler of her own world, capable of making her own decisions. It was then that Demeter realized she was no longer the mother of a child. Persephone ate the pomegranate seeds, which would have sealed her fate, but Zeus worried about Demeter. If she did not return to her duties, the mortals would continue to suffer and no longer trust the gods. To appease both Demeter and Hades, Zeus let Persephone live on Earth with her mother, but only if she agreed to return 3 months a year to the underworld. During those 3 months, Demeter craved her daughter's return. Heartbroken, she let the world become dark and barren, but each spring, when Persephone emerged from the underworld, Demeter rejoiced and allowed the land to grow rich and fertile again with new life. And so the seasons came to be.
Nice, thank you. One of the reasons that we write, and that specifically we write memoir, is to make sense of our own experiences, but also to share those experiences and our insights with others. In the words of Ian Forster, to only connect. I don't have children yet. I connected to your story. It made me reflect on my experiences, not only as a daughter, but as a partner, a friend, a sibling. One could say that it's about addiction. We've all got some sort of addiction, whether it's to love, food, alcohol, phones, shopping, control. And I wonder, while you were writing this, if you had a specific audience in mind.
When I first started writing, someone asked me, well, who's your audience? I said, me. I'm writing for women and mothers who have the similar experience as I do, and hopefully this will be of some help. But I realized after I wrote the book and started talking with people about it, I had all these millennial moms who would come up to me and say, oh, I've got a daughter who's like in middle school and I need to understand my relationship with her. Or other people said, you know, this really is something that a father or a son could also appreciate. So, or someone, or a caretaker, or someone dealing with grief. So I realized that the audience was larger, could be larger. But I also wrote for people who don't really understand what depression and addiction and recovery is about, because I felt like it was really important for me to share my understanding of recovery. And I wanted to write about that stigma. I'll tell you a little story. In 2000, it was about 2010, my husband and I went to a wedding of a friend of his, and we're standing in line at the wedding, and I turned around to the couple behind us and start chatting them up and ask them who they are, how do they know the bride and groom, where do they live, do they have children, what are your children doing? And the husband said, well, my daughter and her boyfriend are living in our basement. They're recovering heroin addicts. And I said, oh, I didn't know what to say. I turned around and ran off and got another drink. And that night I went home and said to my husband, can you imagine what that must be like? I can't imagine. That was how he said that like his daughter was getting her PhD in biology or something. He was so proud of her. And I thought, what is that about? I had no idea. So part of the reason I wrote this was for people who were like I was at one point, who really don't understand addiction and recovery. But also a couple of years later, after my daughter had gone to rehab, we went to another wedding, same family, different daughter, same couple was there. And I walked up to this man and I said, you know, the last time we met, I really didn't understand what you were talking about, but now my daughter's in rehab He didn't say a word. He just came up and gave me a hug. And I thought, I didn't need any words. I just needed compassion. So this book is my hug.
Can you read another passage?
Okay. Um, So I went to a silent retreat. And during that retreat, I went to a field and was lying in a hammock and suddenly by myself and suddenly came face to face with a coyote about 10 feet away. We locked eyes for what seemed to be forever, waiting for the other one to make a move. Then I did the only thing that felt natural, what I often did as a mother. I started talking. I talked in run-on sentences, a steady stream of mother verbiage. I told this creature that he was totally out of line. I told him matter-of-factly that I didn't appreciate him being so close and that I was going to stand up and leave. And I wasn't about to run because I did know that he had a bunch of friends waiting for him in the woods and all of his friends lurking around would come join him in chasing me. I told him what he was doing was threatening and I didn't like it. I was clear and firm, getting louder and more insistent, gathering confidence the more I spoke. I kept on like this until he rolled his eyes and trotted off, like my children.
All right.
But he didn't go far away. While I hurried back down the path to the meditation hall, I could see him in the woods. He was following me, walking parallel at a distance. I will never know if he was rabid or sick, a trickster or a messenger. All I knew was that I trusted myself to face my fear that day. I'd made a coyote back off and I could do it again if I needed to.
That passage is so great. And that's towards the end of the book, correct? So after writing the book and after revising the book, if you can reflect on what you learned about yourself through writing the book.
Yeah, I think I learned a ton on many different levels, but the three things that I think were the takeaways for me was that I learned that everyone is on the spectrum of addiction, one way or the other. There's no us and them. Number two, I learned that I had been focusing on regretting the past or worrying about the future rather than trying to stay in the present moment where I could be a more effective parent. And the third thing was that I misunderstood what it meant to let go. I used to think when people would tell me to let go, I would think that I had to abandon my child. And instead, what I learned was that I had to let go of my fear. So this was a very important process for me to write the book.
That's great. What advice would you give to other people thinking about writing a memoir? Like what would be some kernels of advice?
Well, given the fact that this is my first book and I had no idea, and I think you'd be a much better person suggesting this, but I would just say, pick a moment in your life that was pivotal and write about it.
Yeah. Are there any other passages you'd like to read? I think we're okay. So let's take some questions from the audience.
What was your daughter's impression of the book?
What was my daughter's impression of the book? Well, she read it in front of me, which made me extremely nervous. I pretended not to watch her read it. And afterwards, she looked up to me and said, "This is a love story to me, isn't it?" And I said, "Yeah, it is."
I love that. And it's in there. It's in the book as the epilogue.
Oh, yeah. And she also wrote the epilogue.
Yeah. There's a question.
Ken, I can't wait to read it. But I have a question. You said earlier that if you realize that you caused the situation with your daughter, then you confront it and deal with it. And you touched on some of the things you changed within yourself. But could you go into a little more detail about that?
I'm not sure what the question is, but
How you modified your own being?
I think there was a lot of, I mean, one of the things I say in the book is that I became a junkie for regret. I really found that staying in that place of regret or blaming myself was my way of releasing my fear and pain. Somehow I thought I could have more control over the situation. And what I realized was that worrying doesn't help anything. Regretting doesn't help anything. The only thing that was really helpful was just be as present as possible in each moment, and each moment changed. So I had to keep learning how to pivot and how to be open for whatever was being presented. Does that help?
Other questions?
And you said that your family was raised not wanting to share dirty laundry, and I dare say the majority of people in this room were raised in families like that. This is an extremely important story to get out so that other people can understand that they're not in this by themselves. But there had to be an aha moment for you to overcome that inbred tendency to, oh my God, I can't let people know, everything's perfect. I can't let. What was there a breakthrough moment that you said, wait a second, I got to move on here?
I can't think of a particular moment. I feel like it came over time, but in the beginning, as I wrote the book, I realized how much in denial and how much resistance I had to accepting the severity of my daughter's depression. And so once I was able to accept that and to understand that our family was going through something that was really important, then that kind of overrode my concerns about what anybody else thought. So.
Other questions?
So would you say that overall it kind of brought your family to a much deeper place together? Like, did you have to do family therapy to support your daughter, or
Well,
what was the overall learning?
I think the overall learning was that we learned to accept each other for who we were, and not and where we were, each of us, not just. And I think it was important for me for my daughter to understand that she wasn't the problem, that we were all part of the solution. And part of that was deeper communication and more honesty and more confronting things and supporting each other through our individual problems and coming together as a family. So yeah, it was very helpful to all of us.
Other questions?
I'm gonna ask you about the writer part of this. To choose to use the Demeter and Persephone myth, did you feel like it might be too weighty at first to put in with your own story, or bold to choose something as well known or ancient? And then the second part is, because I've had the privilege and such pleasure to read this before, I wondered if you would share your conversations with scholars about the myth. It's just so interesting where you ended up deciding.
I think, considering the fact that I wrote the book for myself first, I really wasn't too concerned. I thought, if I sell 10 copies, I'm going to be happy. And my dear husband bought 10 copies, so I was done. Thank you, Henry. So I wasn't trying to establish myself as a writer in any deep way. But I think, to your point, I was quite concerned about who am I to write about this myth. And I did speak to a couple of people who were scholars in that area, and they said, this myth has been translated, reinterpreted for centuries. one more isn't gonna matter. I said, okay. So, yeah.
And could you please talk about Malvado and that choice to include that element and what it means to you now in hindsight?
Okay, in the book, there is a shadowy figure that I called Malvado that it's a little bit of a long story, but an image that I saw when I was in Spain and kind of haunted me. And this image, this figure was kind of an extension of all my negative thoughts toward myself. So I wanted to kind of have a persona for this in a way so that I could, in the books, and also I think it kind of helped. When I was going through a lot of my anxiety, I was having almost dissociative states where I would imagine maybe someone in the backseat of my car listening to a conversation when they weren't there. It wasn't really real, but it was just more sort of, I would thought I was going crazy slightly. So in the book, this is the figure that, the Malvado figure that keeps appearing and is sort of an embodiment of all the self-negative talk I was doing.
And that last part, do you have any reflections on that choice to include Malvado now? Do you see it differently from when you were writing the book?
No, I'm still very happy that I included that. And that was an important part of the writing process for me.
Any other questions? Yeah.
What are you working on now in your journal? What do you aspire to do next? And no pressure, but I'm just curious. You've developed this, you've explained it so beautifully. We're all looking forward to reading it. What's next?
Well, I jokingly tell people that my next book is called The Fall of Rome and Other Travel Stories, because my husband had an accident in Rome. But I haven't really done that yet. So I'm just trying to get through this part, and we'll see if there's another book there or not.
Yeah, those questions.
The title Craving Spring is kind of obviously circular in the myth, the Demeter Persephone story. How do you see the title relating to your process and your travel through your experiences?
Yeah, I think for me, when I said before that I feel like we're all on the spectrum of addiction, I think all parents especially want their kids to be happy. They want springtime to be there all the time. We want the world to be the way we want it to be. And when it doesn't work out that way, we suffer because we struggle against that. So my craving for my daughter was for her to be happy and everything to be spring-like, and for her to be out of recovery and everything back to normal. And that was ridiculous, because recovery is not a linear thing for any of us. For me also, I kept going backsliding in my own codependence or whatever. And I think the less we crave things to be perfect, the more we can accept the reality that things are going to change and that things get better and then worse, and that winter will follow spring and spring will follow winter. And just having, it was about learning how to trusting myself as a mother, trusting her and her process. And so it was about that. Craving was the opposite of trusting, really.
As a wrapping up or conclusion, and what do you hope that people will take from the book, and any final thoughts?
Primarily, I wrote this book as a way to offer support and compassion for people who are going through similar situations. I also hope that it will help reduce the stigma that's out there about mental illness, and And also, hopefully it's a good read for people who like memoir.
Well, thank you so much, and congratulations on Craving Spring. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you.